I thought tonight it might be useful to talk about when ego gets threatened. So what often happens is that there's a mind attack, right? We get caught up in the turmoil of the mind and it takes us for a ride. And so it's useful to acknowledge that and especially not treat it as a failure. Actually, this is life helping us get redirected towards something that's more fundamental. So let's first talk about ego, because it's a word often thrown about in psychological arenas or spiritual arenas, and as if it's a real thing, right? But if we ever go trying to look for ego, we can't actually find it. There's a cute story by Trungpa Rinpoche that someone was complaining about their ego and how it always takes command of the situation. And Trungpa just said, "Show it to me and I'll stomp it out right here and now." And of course, that's the problem. We can't actually find it when we go looking for it, because it's a concept, right? It's a psychological concept, and we can't actually find a concept in the body anywhere or the mind except as a concept, right? Concept is an abstraction of whatever's real. So if it's an abstraction, we can't ever find it. We can't go to war with an abstraction. We can't go to war. Well, I guess we can go to war with a concept. I mean, that's what many people spend a great amount of energy doing. But when we get right down to it, what we can see is sort of the debris left behind by what we call ego. We can see, anger and resentment and guilt and frustration and disillusionment, and all kinds of feelings can come up. Sadness, all of the sensations that we can say, well, that's, put them under an umbrella called ego. But when we go to look for it, what we can find is we can find thoughts, we can find feelings, we can find sensations in the body, and we can have memories, right? Where's the ego? When that's the problem of actually going looking for it, what we end up being able to perceive is the same things we can perceive at all other times in life. We can perceive, how we feel inside, physically, emotionally. We can sense into our thought stream and what thoughts happen to be going through our head, and what's in our visual field, and what we hear, what we taste. Ego's nowhere to be found, right? What we can sense are these sensations, the thoughts, the feelings, bodily sensations. That is our experience. And all of that experience is happening within our ability to notice these different arisings, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we can notice those thoughts and feelings, etc., it's usually the thoughts that get us into most of the trouble, cause us the most suffering. The feelings are often a byproduct of the thought. The thought occurs, and there's a feeling in the body, And we take that feeling in the body to be evidence that the thought is true, and that amplifies the thought, which then in turn amplifies the feeling, and we can get caught in a loop very easily. Right? But all of this is based on our tendency to take what appears within the field of awareness as our identity, right? We tend to identify with what thoughts we have, what opinions that we have, what ideologies, what dogmas. We take ourselves to be our life history as it's remembered. We take it to be our set of skills, how we interact with other people, our family situations, where we live, what race, what gender, what religious tradition, and on and on and on. And that's how we define who we are. And that's true in a relative sense. You know, we have to acknowledge that we all have our unique situation, our unique background, or, you know, what led us to this point, our unique views, our unique ancestry, etc. That's all true on a relative level. But perhaps what we can see is that as long as we take ourselves to be limited to that, limited to what this organism thinks and believes and has experienced, and as it is conditioned, if we take that to be the entirety of what we are, we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to being poked by the next situation, the next thing somebody says about us. Maybe they'll say something nice. Maybe they won't. We never know. Maybe the next news flash might be a good thing. Maybe not. Maybe it'll enhance our sense of safety. Maybe not. You know, so as long as we take ourselves to be limited to these thoughts and these feelings and this organism, the world can be a difficult place to be in. And so we spend a lot of our time and energy creating a strategy to protect what we believe that we are. You know, if someone says something derogatory toward us, you know, how do we respond? You know, do we respond with anger? Do we respond with, you know, resentment? Respond with revenge? Respond with despondency? You know, victimhood? I mean, all of those are basically strategies to protect what we believe we are. You know, we can try to, you know, refine those strategies. May have some value, who knows, on a relative sense. But the question is, what exactly are we protecting? Right? We're not talking about physical danger here. We're talking about psychological insults, right? Things that trigger us. And then there's a reaction. Reaction comes out of our own individual conditioning. The same thing could be said to another person, and they might just slough it off or think it was funny, or you know, just not respond to it at all. Just wouldn't bother them, just because of their particular conditioning. They might be triggered by something else that you're not triggered by. So the sense of ego has everything to do with conditioning, right? How this particular organism was indoctrinated as it grew. You know, it wasn't really born with that kind of psychological conditioning, maybe to a certain mild extent, but most of the conditioning that we now operate from was taken on board in this lifetime, unknowingly, right? None of us, you know, decided at some early age that, you know, our strategy in this life was to be play the role of a victim. You know, we never thought, oh, okay, this is good. I'm going to go with this one. And I have lots of choices, but I'm going to choose being a victim in this lifetime. We didn't do that. Whatever our strategy happened to be, it was taken on board in innocence. And the people that were pushing that a particular viewpoint were also operating in, you could call it ignorance or you could call it innocence. Either way, it's done in an unknowing way. So when we take ourselves to be this conglomerate conditioning, this package, when we take ourselves to be that and someone pokes at it, that's when this, what's called ego responds. But it's really conditioning. It's really how this particular organism was conditioned to respond to certain kinds of stimulation. If we see that capacity in ourselves, see that those points of reaction, see where that sudden flare up of whatever our defensive strategy is or offensive strategy, we can see that, okay, that's how this organism was programmed. The question is that who I am? And the answer for most people is, yeah, that's what I am. You know, I'm a person that gets angry when someone says this and this and this to me. But we can really check in with that. What exactly is requiring protection? Again, I'm not talking about, physical harm here. I'm talking about, psychological, incoming psychological threats. And I'm also not talking about sustained psychological abuse. Clearly, there's a limit to what should be tolerated in that regard. And if you find yourself in that situation, gather up enough courage to get out of it. But what I'm talking about is the much more common sense of being vulnerable, being anxious about situations. The more certain we are that our identity is housed in this set of conditioning that we all have in different ways, but we all have our own unique variety of it. But if our belief is that that's what I am, when it gets poked, it feels like the entirety of me is being threatened, right? And so naturally, can be an explosive response to that. So what we've been talking so far about is, the normal day-to-day situations, people at work, relatives, family members, whatever, say something. So an incoming threat and our response to that. But what's even more threatening, much more threatening to the sense of personal identity is someone saying, it's not who you are. None of it. It's how this body was conditioned, yes. We still have to live through this body, yes. But it's not who you essentially are. But we're so convinced that that is what we are. I am this organism. I am this history. I am this gender. I am this set of beliefs that I have. That when someone dares to say, not really, not fundamentally, the sense of personhood reacts to that very much like when someone, offers an insult from the outside. It's like, no, I'm going to defend my terrain. But when someone suggests the possibility that our true nature is actually something much more expansive than that, not limited by this conditioning, When someone suggests that, it's sort of like a circle the wagons moment and saying, no, I may feel a little constrained here, but it's familiar. And I'm going to hang on to every bit of it, as you know, till the bitter end. It's useful to see that what the mind believes in terms of our identity is it knows it's vulnerable. Deep down, it knows that. The mind knows that it's on shaky ground. And the more we go down the road that I'm talking about here, the more the mind feels threatened. You know, I'm not talking about our logical thinking mind. I'm talking about our sort of where the mind reverts to when it doesn't have anything better to do. You know, all the self-criticisms and judgments about others and certainties about life and all of that. So when someone pokes at that a little bit and says, well, that actually may not be who you are, there's very real possibility that the mind can react to that. It might react to it violently, you know, protectively, like, no, this is me. I know that I'm me and don't say anything otherwise. Or it might be a little more subtle than that. It's, you know, in the form of doubt or hesitancy or argumentativeness. These are all defenses from the mind. I mean, the mind may, in so many words, say to us, hey, listen, you know, I've been in charge here for quite a few years now, and, you know, you don't want to, you know, walk away from me now. You know, you've counted on me. You know, I haven't done too bad a job so far. And so, you know, just let me be the one to make the final assessment about everything, right? Everything, what's true, what's not. So the usefulness in pointing out this possibility is that when those sort of mind attacks occur, and like I say, they can be violent ones where we're sort of thrashing out at anybody in the vicinity, or they can be more subtle where we, you know, sort of doubt the deeper experiences that we may have had. We doubt, you know, the sensation of peace and in the silent moments that we've had. You know, we doubt the availability of joy and beauty in our life. You know, so it can be anywhere in that spectrum. So it's useful just to see that the mind will do anything to stay in charge. And your mind knows you better than you. It knows you better than you know yourself. So it knows every hook, every weak point, every argument that you're vulnerable to believing. It knows all of that. So it's a worthy opponent in this endeavor, because there's actually two opposing movements. They're not opposing. They're both they're actually both needed, but you know, we're talking about one movement of which is basically no, I'm not going there, and the other movement is longing, something pulling us deeper, something retreating and something moving forward. And so it appears that these are two different movements. When we don't recognize that it can be confusing, because one moment we feel open and receptive and loving and expansive, and the next moment we're caught up in some drama. But I would suggest that the drama is life's way of showing us the unpleasant consequences of believing everything that goes through our head. When we can take it in that sense, then every mind attack that comes along, we can, rather than seeing it as a spiritual failure, we can see it as life's sort of redirecting our attention to what is more real, right? So we don't have to regret or be frustrated with, those sort of mind storms that may arise from some time. It may surprise us. We might think, well, heck, I've been on the spiritual thing for 20 years now, and I thought I had my mind pretty well figured out, and then here something comes rushing in and completely overwhelms me. It's just the next thing appearing, right? The next opportunity to learn something on a more deeper level. So every opportunity, but particularly the ones that hook us, are opportunities to redirect our attention back to our fundamental nature, back to this essential beingness, this essential fundamental spaciousness, this awareness within which all of this arises. So what we can do, just on a very practical level, when something hooks us and starts to take us for a ride, as quickly as we have the consciousness to notice it, right now my mind is being taken for a ride, and watch the ride. Right? That's what we can do. Watch how the mind plays out. Watch what it tells itself, without buying into it, without arguing with it, without judging it. Just remain present for it and watch how it plays out. It won't last forever. Might last for longer than you'd like it to, but it won't last forever. So we can just allow that to play out and recognize that it's not a mistake. We can really, truly take it as an opportunity to see on an ever deeper level what kinds of triggers this particular organism is conditioned to be vulnerable to. And the more we can see that, the less vulnerable we are to it. And we may get hooked from time to time. And maybe sometimes we'll get hooked and it'll take us for a ride for a month. And then as we become more aware of that process, that conditioning, maybe the next time it happens, it only consumes us for a week, and then maybe a day, and then maybe an hour. And then maybe we see it when it's actually happening. We feel that urge arising, and say, oh, there's that conditioning arising again. I'm just not getting aboard that train. We can't stop the thought from arising. That's part of the conditioning. But what we can do is become more and more aware of that conditioning, so that when that particular trigger occurs, we see it for what it is.